picture this. It's late at night. You're lying down in bed.
Just staring at the ceiling.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The phone is plugged in all the way across the room, totally out of reach. There's no talking, no music playing, just absolute silence.
Which is pretty rare these days.
It really is. And in that quiet, unoccupied space, a tiny, stubborn thought creeps in. It whispers, what am I doing with my life? Like, am I completely wasting it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, that specific creeping anxiety is just incredibly universal. I mean, it really doesn't require a midlife crisis or some massive failure to trigger it, you know?
Right, it could happen on a random Tuesday.
Exactly. It happens on perfectly normal, completely uneventful days. It sort of manifests as this lingering feeling of not a lack of money or friends, but the distinct lack of a clear, undeniable why.
Which brings us right to the mission for today's deep dive. We've compiled a really fascinating stack of sources for you today.
Really good stuff in here.
Yeah, we're looking at this profound essay that synthesizes 19th and 20th century existential philosophy. And we're pairing it with some very recent sociological research on modern workplace burnout and identity.
Because those two things are actually super connected.
They really are. Our goal here is to unpack that exhausting, totally invisible pressure to live a quote-unquote meaningful life.
And, you know, the source text grounds this feeling in Jean-Paul Sartre's concept of being thrown into the world.
Thrown? Like, literally.
Well, philosophically, since we don't arrive with a pre-written script or some universal objective that we're biologically required to fulfill, we're essentially forced to define our purpose entirely on our own.
So there's no instruction manual.
None. Sartre's framework of thrownness is it's the perfect starting point because it identifies that vacuum. We exist first, and then we have to invent our essence.
But the pressure in that late-night scenario I described, it doesn't feel like a vacuum at all. It feels heavy.
Right, exactly.
It feels like there's a very specific script you're failing to read from, even if you can't actually see the words.
Yeah, because the psychological conditioning that creates this pressure, it accumulates over decades. And the source material actually traces the origin way back to how we shape identity in early childhood.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if no one is actually standing over us, demanding we find a grand purpose,
right,
and there's no universal script we're failing to follow, where is this immense crushing pressure actually coming from?
Well, it really comes from the language we use to structure reality. I mean, consider the most common question adults ask children.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
We rarely ask, how do you want to live? Or what kind of daily experiences do you want to have? We almost always ask, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Wow. Yeah, we train them to view their existence as a noun instead of a verb.
Exactly. And that linguistic shift is profound. It trains the human brain from this highly neuroplastic age to view life not as an ongoing fluid experience, but as a rigid destination.
Like you have to arrive somewhere to matter.
Right. And the psychologist Carl Rogers described this through his concept of the ideal self. We learn early on to adopt a version of ourselves that society approves of and rewards.
Because a child gets praised when they articulate a clear trajectory, right? Like when they name a respectable profession.
Exactly. When they say, I want to be a doctor or an astronaut, they get that positive reinforcement. Consequently, the brain's reward center starts associating human value exclusively with a defined, productive legacy.
So the person with a meaningful life just becomes this idealized phantom you're perpetually chasing.
Yes, exactly.
You know, treating life as a destination inevitably turns it into a project.
Yeah.
It's like we've been tricked into treating our lives as a corporate project pitch.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right, we're sitting in our own mental boardroom, evaluating ourselves like a ruthless project manager. We demand status updates, we establish KPIs, and we calculate the ROI on our own existence.
You're just ruthlessly auditing your own life.
Totally. We sit there asking, where is the deliverable for my 30s? Like, where's the milestone for this quarter?
And taking that corporate analogy a step further, treating your life like a project traps you in what Sartre called the anxiety of freedom.
How so?
Well, because there is no ultimate objective authority in the universe to sign off on your project pitch. There's literally no one to definitively say, yes, your deliverable is correct.
So the milestones are essentially hollow.
Pretty much.
You graduate, you land the stable job, you update your professional profile, and you get this temporary wave of dopamine.
But it is entirely temporary. The relief fades because that underlying vacuum Sartre identified, it's still there.
Because hitting a milestone doesn't actually provide an objective guarantee that your life means anything.
Right, so the anxiety rapidly regenerates, the finish line just simply moves. You get caught in this vicious psychological cycle where you constantly need to generate new evidence to prove your existence is justified.
You hit a goal and immediately ask, okay, what's next?
Exactly, because stopping feels like admitting the project has failed.
Okay, I want to push back on the premise for a moment.
Here, go for it.
Because I'm looking at this framework, and the drive for achievement isn't inherently bad, right? Like, we want doctors to cure diseases and we want engineers to innovate. Why is this drive being framed in our sources as something so psychologically toxic?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the toxicity doesn't lie in the ambition or the action itself. The danger lies in relying entirely on external metrics to generate your internal sense of peace.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and when we transition from examining individual psychology to looking at the broader societal architecture, the sources actually group together thinkers like Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Michel Foucault to explain the shift.
And just to be completely clear for you, the listener, as we dive into these socioeconomic critiques from figures like Marx, we are exploring these concepts purely as they are presented in the source text to understand the specific psychological mindset.
Right, we're analyzing the cultural framework.
Exactly. We're not taking sides or endorsing a specific political or economic ideology here. We're just reporting on what the sources say.
Totally. And the socioeconomic critique is really vital for understanding the psychological mechanism at play here. Marx's concept of alienation illustrates what happens when human beings are placed within certain economic structures.
Right. And alienation in this context isn't just about feeling lonely, is it?
No, not at all. It is about becoming estranged from your own human nature. We stop experiencing our lives from the inside out, like evaluating situations based on how they actually feel, or our genuine curiosities, and we begin evaluating our lives from the outside in.
So we look at ourselves the way a consumer looks at a product on a shelf.
Exactly. We start asking, what is the objective market value of this life?
Wow. It's the literal commodification of the self.
Yeah, and Max Weber's ethics of efficiency plays right into this. Modern society intrinsically ties our human value to output and production.
Which we see constantly in the modern gig economy, right? Or just hustle culture in general.
Oh, everywhere. People can barely enjoy a hobby like woodworking or baking without this internal voice suggesting they should monetize it, open an online store, and, optimize their free time.
Right, we basically go from human beings to human doings.
That's a great way to put it. And Michel Foucault's work explains the mechanics of how that external demand for efficiency gets planted so deep inside your own head.
How does that happen?
Well, Foucault observed that modern power structures don't rely on physical force or like a dictator watching your every move. Instead, they rely on self-policing.
Okay, self-policing. Like the panopticon.
Exactly like the panopticon. It's a psychological concept of a prison where the inmates never know exactly when they are being watched, so they behave as if they are being watched at all times.
So society programs the individual to internalize the metrics of success so deeply that you essentially become your own warden.
Precisely. You police yourself.
That perfectly explains the modern phenomenon of feeling intensely guilty on a random Sunday afternoon just for resting.
Oh, totally.
You aren't on the clock. No one is demanding a report from you, but your internalized warden is actively punishing you for not being productive.
Because the internal warden demands efficiency, since your whole identity is tied to it. And our modern media ecosystem functions as this massive super stimulus for this self-policing.
Right, because we're constantly exposed to the curated hero's journey of thousands of other people online.
Yeah, we consume these endless highlight reels of promotions, perfectly optimized morning routines, life-changing travels.
And when you are consuming that sheer volume of manufactured peak experience, meaning a normal, uneventful Tuesday suddenly registers to your brain as a catastrophic failure.
Exactly. We completely lose sight of the statistical reality that the vast majority of human existence is made up of ordinary, unglamorous Tuesdays.
So what happens when that breaks down? Because this sounds incredibly fragile.
It is incredibly fragile. The psychological consequence of this externalization is huge. When an individual defines themselves entirely by external titles and productivity metrics, a disruption to that output is just devastating.
Like losing a job or retiring.
Right, or experiencing a physical limitation. It doesn't just mean a loss of income or routine. it triggers a complete fundamental collapse of identity.
Because the product they were managing and selling to the world has essentially been discontinued.
Yeah, and they're left with absolutely nothing to anchor their sense of self.
Wow. And here's where it gets really interesting in the sources. The material describes the realization of this fragility as a falling sensation.
Yes, an existential drop.
Right. It is the exact moment the illusion shatters, and you realize that all these societal metrics, the relentless project manager mindset, the highlight reels, the relentless optimization, are essentially a rigged game.
They don't offer the objective salvation they promise.
Exactly. And facing that shattered illusion forces you to look directly into the void.
Which is terrifying. Fyodor Dostoevsky actually explored this psychological terror really deeply in his literature.
Right, he wrote about characters who had achieved all the societal metrics of success. They possessed wealth, status, physical comfort.
Yet they suffered agonizing internal torment.
Exactly. Why?
Their suffering stemmed from the realization that their material success did not provide a grand underlying justification for their existence. They desperately needed a cosmic why, and the societal metrics just couldn't provide it.
It's the collision with what Albert Camus called the absurd.
Yes, the absurd.
And applying Camus to our hyper-connected modern world is so fascinating. We have our perfectly color-coded digital calendars, our 5-year plans, our carefully curated personal brands.
All desperate attempts to enforce order and meaning.
Exactly. But the absurd is the profound, agonizing conflict between that desperate human desire for a universe that makes sense and the cold, silent indifference of the universe itself.
You present your corporate project pitch to the universe, asking for validation, and the universe responds with absolute silence.
Wow.
And Camus noted that once a person perceives this absurdity, the awareness is permanent. You really cannot unsee it.
You can't just willfully put the blinders back on and return to chasing societal titles with the genuine belief that they represent ultimate truth.
No, you can't.
So what does this all actually mean? The realization feels paralyzing. I mean, if society's definition of success is a hollow construct and the universe is completely silent, we are just floating.
Yeah, the responsibility to generate meaning falls 100% on the individual.
And the sheer weight of that responsibility explains why people actively choose to retreat back into the illusion. It's just easier to follow a hollow script than to write your own.
The burden is immense, which is exactly why Friedrich Nietzsche issued a stark warning about the transition period following the collapse of the illusion.
He warned of the danger of nihilism, right?
Exactly. Nihilism occurs when the old values, the societal metrics, the traditional structures collapse, but the individual lacks the tools to build authentic values to replace them.
So they just fall into the void.
Yeah, they fall into the void and conclude that if the old rules don't matter, then absolutely nothing matters.
Which is a massive cognitive distortion, going from the universe doesn't have a built-in meaning to my life is completely worthless.
It's a huge leap. Nietzsche saw that despair not as a final destination, but as a really dangerous trap.
Because the collapse of external values is supposed to be the prerequisite for becoming the author of your own value.
Right. But bridging the gap between existential despair and active, authentic living requires a completely different cognitive toolkit.
Which transitions us perfectly into the final segment of our sources. Because if the grand objective meaning of life is an illusion, how does the listener actually function tomorrow?
Right? How do you just live your life?
Yeah. How do you go to the grocery store, answer emails, or maintain relationships when you're fully aware of the absurd?
Well, the text points us away from abstract existentialism here and toward a highly practical operating system, which is Stoicism.
Ah, the Stoics.
Yeah, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the Stoics recognize the exact same reality that Sartre and Camus did.
They understood that external legacy is fleeting and the universe is largely outside of our control.
Exactly. However, thinkers like Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca utilized that awareness to develop a unified methodology for daily action, rather than just using it as a reason for paralysis.
Take Marcus Aurelius, for example. He was literally a Roman emperor with more objective power and legacy than almost anyone in human history.
Right.
Yet he consistently reminded himself that seeking legacy is pointless. He wrote that you shouldn't live as if you need to be remembered, because the people who remember you will also die.
It's a brutal, ego-destroying truth.
It really is. It immediately renders the modern obsession with building a quote-unquote personal brand completely absurd.
And that brutal honesty forces the cognitive focus back into the immediate present. Epictetus actually provided the psychological mechanism for this.
What did he suggest?
He argued that tying your internal equilibrium to things outside your direct control, such as societal recognition, the success of your career, or how you are perceived by others, guarantees persistent anxiety.
Because you are essentially outsourcing your emotional regulation to a fickle, unpredictable crowd.
Exactly. You give away your power.
And then Seneca shifts the metric of success entirely away from accumulation. He advised that the value of a life is not measured by its duration or the titles acquired, but by the degree of consciousness applied to it.
Right. A successful life is one that doesn't just slip away while you are distracted by chasing illusions.
So the Stoic methodology is fundamentally about shrinking your focus.
Yes, radically shrinking it. The modern existential panic comes from trying to solve the macro problem, like, what is my cosmic purpose?
And the Stoics argue that this question is basically a structural trap.
It is. You do not need to define your entire life's trajectory today. You only need to reclaim agency in the micro moments.
It's like, instead of trying to draw a flawless, comprehensive blueprint for a magnificent cathedral that might never actually be built, the Stoics are asking you a much simpler question.
Which is?
Are you going to lay this one single brick today?
Oh, that's perfect. Laying the brick is exactly the authentic action Nietzsche was pointing toward.
Right.
It means acting honestly in the present moment without demanding a cosmic reward. It's having the difficult conversation you've been avoiding.
Or stopping the procrastination on a mundane task.
Exactly. It's performing an act of kindness that will never be commodified, never be praised, and never make it onto a social media highlight reel.
You essentially abandon the search for a perfect answer from the universe, and you substitute it with a refusal to live unconsciously.
You make choices aligned with your internal values, totally isolated from that ethics of efficiency we talked about earlier.
So let's synthesize this journey for you, the listener. We began by deconstructing the project self, that deeply ingrained childhood conditioning that trains us to view our existence as a destination to be achieved.
And then we examined the societal architecture, the commodification of our time, and the self-policing mechanisms that make us feel like we are constantly failing the demands of productivity.
Right. We faced the existential drop, exploring the terrifying silence of the absurd, and the realization that the universe does not provide an objective rubric for a successful life.
But finally, we found a functional path forward through the Stoic operating system.
We learned how to dismantle the anxiety of forever by shrinking our focus to the manageable reality of right now, laying one brick, consciously and authentically.
And the essential takeaway here is that the absence of a guaranteed universal meaning is not a glitch in your life. It's the baseline reality of the human condition.
Right, it's not a bug, it's a feature.
Exactly. If you engage with your present reality, make conscious choices, and refuse to hide from the absurd, your day possesses profound inherent value, entirely independent of society's external metrics of success.
Before we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Something that builds on this entire concept of the ethics of efficiency and our obsession with output.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have anchored our entire psychological worth to being productive doers. But consider the rapidly approaching reality of artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
We are moving toward a world where algorithms and machines will inevitably take over the vast majority of the production and output that society currently values. If human beings are no longer required to be the primary producers, if the corporate pitches, the deliverables, and the milestones are completely automated, who are we?
That is a heavy question.
If our entire identity is tied to efficiency, a post-work world will force society into a collective existential drop, whether we like it or not. The Stoic pivot we discussed today might not just be a philosophical relief for late-night anxiety. It might be the required survival skill for the next decade.
Honestly, that's a very real possibility.
So next time it's late at night and that little voice whispers, "What do I do with my life?" Maybe you can just smile at the silence, close your eyes, and know that laying your one human brick tomorrow is more than enough.
Beautifully said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.